Hey guys,
Good morning.
are we live?
I think you and I are live at least. It's not sure if Paul's caught up with the real moment yet.
I think I am.
You look alive. Okay, then I think you're with it. I'm jealous you guys get to work together now.
Yeah, it's fun. I gotta tell you, life on the airplane is not always fun. I had the worst flight of my entire life last week, and I was going to visit Paul, but I spent the entire flight in the bathroom heaving with norovirus.
Oh, because you had the GI plague in your house.
Yeah, it hit me during takeoff, and the flight attendant would not let me in the bathroom, so I just sat there at the seat. I feel really bad for my seatmate.
Did you have to use one of those like snack bags, those little roll-up bags?
I used the behind the seat bag, and then I never got to saw Paul because I quarantined myself in my hotel room for the next 48 hours.
And we're all happy for it.
And you look great, Paul. You look great. I prefer you virtually, actually.
You do look svelte, Trevor. You look like the Hollywood diet. So it's good.
Exactly.
All right, should we hop in?
Well, I don't think we're going to give anybody GI plague, but we might make them feel like it.
Welcome to Health Tech Remedy, the show where three physician leaders in health technology break down the stories behind today's most innovative health companies and speak with the leaders shaping the future of care. I'm Trevor Royce, radiation oncologist and researcher with experience in real-world evidence, informatics, and AI diagnostics.
And I'm Paul Gerard. I started my career in physical medicine and rehabilitation before focusing on reimbursement policy, molecular diagnostics, and market access for AI-driven products.
And I'm Tim Showalter, a radiation oncologist and former med device entrepreneur, now focused on scaling AI technologies that improve care for cancer patients.
This week, we're diving into RevealDX, a company applying AI and radiomics to one of the most common and most consequential problems in diagnostic imaging, the identification of lung nodules.
RevealDX is focused not just on finding nodules, but on helping clinicians decide which ones actually matter.
And I think it's that distinction, the detection versus characterization, where things get really interesting. Maybe we can start by focusing a little bit on the problem overall.
Fundamentally, what's the problem that RevealDX is solving for? And I feel like this is probably underappreciated, amongst the lay public, but as clinicians, we're sort of during our training, it's beaten into us to become acutely aware of the costs of imaging. And what I mean by costs is not necessarily financial costs, but the downstream consequences. And so if you get a CT scan, inevitably you're going to find something. And often that's lung nodules or little spots in the lungs that may or may not be a problem. But this can cause issues like anxiety for the patient that you've now found something that previously you had no idea was there and actually may never bother you at all. So there's a direct consequence of identifying this new nodule. But of course, once you find it, you have to do something about it. And so you've got your CT scan, you see something in the lung, and what happens now? And that's, fundamentally what these guys are trying to help out with. This is basically exploded with the introduction of three-dimensional imaging in healthcare for so many different reasons.
Trevor, there's like the incidentaloma term, right? Like we have a medical term for these things that are found on CT scans. And when you think about the problem at scale, like if you're managing, say, a hospital, radiology department, the number of these nodules that are going to be identified in particular is pretty remarkable. And if you focus on the health system level, obviously this becomes a huge challenge to make sure that patients don't fall through the cracks and that you've prioritized things in the right way. And it's important to have some support for that overall. And I think the critical distinction here is that RevealDX is really focusing on applying radiomics to characterize these nodules and do a better job of providing support for identifying which of these are really high risk and may actually represent, cancerous nodules versus things that are benign. And I think that's the sort of support that people need.
I feel like every second CT scan I had in a patient over the age of 65, there was a lung nodule. And somebody, a radiologist gives Fleischner a lung rad score, and they all needed a follow-up CT scan in 3-6 months. And you're trying to make sure their primary care provider knows about it, gets it done. The impression I've gotten is that those systems are, intentionally conservative to avoid missed cancers, which I think is appropriate. But of course, then you end up with a lot of scans. And of course, if you're the patient and you've got a lung nodule and somebody says this could be cancer, and oh, by the way, we're going to wait 3-6 months to make that decision, doesn't exactly put you in a happy place for the next 3 to 6 months.
This is a great term, incidentaloma, Tim. I'm glad you brought that up. That can apply to any image that you get. like a CT scan of the abdomen or an MRI of the brain, or anytime you're looking at something, you might find something that you weren't initially looking for, hence your incidentaloma. But Tim, I don't know if you want to reflect a little bit on why the lungs are particularly kind of have outsized relevance in this concept.
The lungs are particularly compelling because it's really the challenge that reflects the system at scale for the most part. I mean, one way to think about why this is such an impact is that there are compelling data for using low dose CT scans as screening to identify patients who are at risk for lung cancer. And so there's I don't know the exact population numbers, but a lot of people in the U.S. who should be receiving low dose chest CT screening to identify lung cancer. And then, of course, there are plenty of patients who show up in an emergency department with some sort of acute condition and would have a chest CT. It sort of would be the standard part of workup for many conditions, and then all of the other sorts of scans that are done through being ordered for other purposes can identify these small lung nodules.
I think that's right. Like they've been these large population studies that have shown a benefit to doing screening. Basically giving people that have the right history CT of the chest because they've been smokers or whatever. And we walk around the world and breathe dirty air, and all of us are going to have certain little spots in our lungs. It becomes a question of whether that spot is meaningful or not.
Yeah, and I think this is where, maybe it's good to talk about RevealDX's core product. It's called Reveal AI Lung. And it's an interesting tool that's focused on characterization, not just detection. So I think some of the challenges that in a radiology report, you might have a description of like, we see a nodule, it's a certain size, it's there. And then the rest of the care team is left to follow up on that. But RevealDX's product focuses on a index score or a malignancy similarity index or MSI that estimates how similar a given nodule is to known malignant nodules. And I think by providing a score to it, I think it provides additional support for triaging or sort of framing the patient's individual risk. And as Paul pointed out earlier, I think a lot of these are pretty conservative tools. A lot of the frameworks that have been otherwise provided before this are pretty conservative tools. And so it's helpful to have more of a stratification of risk.
If you're a clinician now, you're looking at something that's not just a binary call, hey, at risk of malignancy or not. It's telling you, hey, we think it looks like malignancy. Here's how much, and then that helps you. You can put it to, you always get that nodules, unknown significance, clinically correlate. Well, now you have something to clinically correlate with, because you can say, oh, it's this is a high risk. I already had a high pretest probability. I'm at a particularly high index of suspicion for this patient having cancer, and something like this brings that index even higher.
I mean, there's still the clinician in the loop, right? So I think that's what a lot of people want to see from care. So there's still a physician making a decision or a care team making a decision about how to approach these. But I think having that score provides additional level of support.
So I think a lot of the efforts today have been sort of building the evidence showing how their product performs. And, so that means writing manuscripts, submitting to journals, having it reviewed by peers. And they've had some success there where they show, how their score performs in terms of risk discrimination, how much statistically does it reduce things like false positives, meaning that you have a dangerous lung nodule, but actually it isn't, and comparing that against to sort of the standard or not using a tool like this and just having the radiologist involved.
Yeah, I think overall what is interesting about laying this on top of just simple size measurements is that you can get some movement on, reductions in false positives and sort of some of the population-based metrics that can help a system handle a large throughput for patients overall. And they've got some peer-reviewed reports that have added some, evidence behind that, and I expect to see more from them over time.
Yeah, I think some of the numbers that we saw was maybe around 30% reduction in false positives compared to baseline workflows. And it may be worthwhile just to quickly play out, what that means by a false positive. That's like the idea of saying, oh, we found a nodule. We think it's bad. We need to do something about it. Often the next step there would be to stick a needle in it and do a biopsy. And there can be downstream consequences to that. And what do we mean by that? You could injure a patient by giving them an infection, or they could have their lung collapse after the biopsy. Then they become hospitalized. These patients have bad lungs because they have a history of smoking. And then all of a sudden you have a patient that's bought themselves a couple nights in the hospital for a nodule that actually was nothing. So, that's what we mean by false positives and the cost of this.
They had a COPD and now they're an event because of that lung biopsy.
Exactly what you want to avoid. Yeah.
I mean, that's a rare case, but like it's not a made up story. Like, there can be real harm.
These risks are low on the individual level, but when you apply these approaches across populations, the numbers add up. You start having a law of large numbers involved.
That's like really critical here is, right now there's a lot of discussion in the world about catching cancer early, and that is important, but there's the flip side of it. Okay, you've caught something suspicious for cancer, and a lot of those are going to be non-cancerous. They're going to be suspicious for cancer. And so, it's in a world where, we just had a bill passed that would cover multi-cancer early detection blood tests, which I think is great. You still got to figure out, okay, how are we going to reduce those false positives in places where we already have screening programs set up, or where we are routinely imaging a body part and screening for cancer, even if we're not deliberately screening for cancer because we're just happening to do, imaging of that body part. And so I think that, being able to rule out these cancers is in some respects a little bit of a direction, a little bit of a movement in the opposite direction that we see happening in society. But it's a move where we already have established screening programs set up. And I think this is going to become even more important as cancer screening becomes more prevalent in more cancers.
I've read that RevealDX has clearance in Australia and New Zealand, and obviously there is a stringent evidence bar there. They certainly differs from FDA standards. My understanding is they're working towards additional validation for US FDA clearance as well.
Yeah, and Tim, I think you've been doing a lot of work in this space, and when you get these approvals, then you can start collecting data in other ways, either through real world use or prospective data collection. Like, it can kind of be a positive feedback loop.
Well, I think they do have some reports out there for some interest for U.S. health systems. It'll be interesting to follow how that plays out over time. And, a lot of health systems are thinking about how they use technology to manage their lung nodule workflows and, support their teams that are managing that. And so I think there is some interest in the U.S. It's certainly, this is a space that I've had some involvement in recently. And it's a landscape where there are a lot of tools available. None of them are absolutely perfect, but I think as part of an overall strategy, something like this where you have a stratification could be really helpful for, an overburdened health system trying to do the best job to serve patients.
Yeah, and I think in a crowded space, and Paul, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but an important piece of demonstrating the value of a tool like this is showing how it actually changes clinical management and actually changes decision-making. How does it influence what the providers ultimately do and how the patients actually do?
I mean, that's obviously going to be the hardest part is like how do the patients ultimately do? Because, it's especially if you're detecting early lung nodules, getting the outcomes on that can be a while. Ideally, what we will see is that this will reduce unnecessary biopsies, unnecessary imaging, and that patients are going to do just as well 10 years down the line, if not better.
What payers think matters a lot, and reimbursement is going to be key for deployment of solutions like this. And obviously, we're all in the AI space, and so there's going to be a lot of technology like this. Can you give a little bit of comment, like what do they need to show to payers, and like what's how critical is like reimbursement considerations in this?
Yeah, well, okay. So I think one of the things to mention here is that there can be a lot of politics in this too, and if they were to pick up support of some kind of major guideline like USPSTF or something, which I don't know if they will, but if they were, that kind of that has its own pathway and its own implications. I think, if barring that, if you're just saying, okay, what would payers necessarily want to see within the evidence? I think one of the big things is, they really want to understand what is the ultimate outcome on patients. That is what they want the plausible story on. Ideally, they would have that evidence that looks, say 5-10 years out, that shows that there is reduced utilization with preserved outcomes or similar utilization of care with improved outcomes. What they are really worried about is that they would cover a new technology that would potentially worsen outcomes, even if it reduced utilization. I think contrary to popular belief, obviously payers do want to save money. You don't want to be the payer that's covering a novel technology and worsening patient outcomes while doing it. So I think that's something that you tend to see. The other thing is, if you say, okay, we're going to get this, what's somebody going to do after they have the results? And I think this is where guidelines will become important, because if guidelines are still based around things like, Fleischner or Lungrad's, what you'll end up having is you'll say, the doctors will get the CT scan. They'll say, oh, okay, I need to re-CT them in, I don't know, 3-6 months. I need to biopsy them. Yeah, sure, this RevealDX score does give me a little more information, but if I'm still following a guideline-driven care pathway and the guideline has not yet incorporated the technology, it's not going to change my management at all. And payers don't like to see that either. I mean, this is where guidelines can become really important is even if the science is there, if you're the payer, you may be thinking, well, the science might be there, but until the field catches up with the science, it's not necessarily changing the patient's course of management. And it's not really, worth paying for if patients get the same treatment regardless. Payers want to pay for science that is implemented in practice, not science that is theoretical and could be implemented in practice.
That makes a ton of sense. I'll also add as a simple rule, if the evidence supports payers covering this and payers can generate revenue for using this, you see if it is, it's the way to get this technology implemented. So I think, it's if there is some sort of a opportunity there, I think it would really be a way to drive implementation overall, if it does truly move the needle for patient care.
One takeaway from kind of what Paul was talking about is that the adoption of these types of technologies don't happen overnight. And there's a lot that needs to happen before it becomes widely adopted. And, that's probably the system kind of working as it should when you're dealing with human lives. But just having the evidence and building this cool algorithm that detects nodules isn't good enough. That's just part of the story. You still have to get into guidelines. You have to get, show that it's useful, show, what the impacts on patient outcomes are and all these downstream things. That takes a lot of time and energy.
Yeah. So I think that our listeners are going to want to stick around. We are fortunate to be joined by the CEO of RevealDX, Chris Wood. Really interesting conversation that we'll have, focusing a bit more on his history as a prior founder in a pretty similar space overall for leveraging technology for cancer detection, and hearing more about what he's up to with RevealDX. So please stick around for the interview with Chris Wood.
Today, we're thrilled to be joined by Chris Wood, CEO of RevealDX. Chris is a serial entrepreneur who has founded and built 2 companies that have successfully exited, including the first company to achieve FDA clearance for an automated cancer detection in breast MR. Welcome to the show, Chris. Excited to have you.
Thanks for having me. It's nice to be here.
So just to kick things off, would kind of love to hear some background on RevealDX, maybe its origin story. Was there an initial insight or moment that led to the pursuit of this? Tell us a little bit about the history of Reveal.
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe a little bit related to your origin story with this podcast. I sold my last company and had to do my 2 years at the acquiring company. After that, I knew I wanted to start something else in medical imaging AI because there's a lot of growth in that industry right now. But I didn't want to spend the next 10 years building a company. So I gathered a bunch of friends that I had known from the industry for quite a while. And they said, let's put our money together, find something that looks like it has a lot of potential. And we started looking around for companies. And we actually bought a company during COVID that was having a hard time raising capital, mostly because of that and a couple of other things. And yeah, I stepped in as CEO. We found it really super attractive because it was solving a big problem. And also there was possibility that it would be reimbursed, which is the holy grail of medical imaging AI. And there are a few companies that have achieved this, including HeartFlow and a couple of others, but it's not common. So we decided to take a run at it. And it's been 5 years. We're almost there, we hope.
Great. Chris, I think that's a fascinating story, and I'm curious to go even a little farther back. Can you give us, our listeners, a little bit of a maybe origin story for Chris Wood? What's your professional background and educational background before all this?
Yeah, so a lot of kids that were sort of my age, I wanted to be an astronaut or a nuclear physicist or something like that, because science was really hot back then. And I ended up actually studying physics in school. And then in graduate school, I had the opportunity to either do laser systems to build guidance for missiles. That was one funded project, or medical imaging was the other one. And I decided to go with medical imaging. I worked at Moffitt Cancer Center in graduate school and got a degree in medical physics, and then went right into industry. So I never practiced clinically, but that was the beginning. When I was in grad school at Moffitt, I remember the first time I wrote software to display some of these images, and I just fell in love with it immediately. I knew it's exactly what I wanted to do with my career, and I've stayed in medical imaging software since then. And of course, right around that era, is when we were replacing film-based reading with digital reading. So we had all this opportunity with 3D acquisitions to do really cool visualizations of medical imaging data. And we also had the reduction of film and replacement with PACS systems. So there was a ton of software to write. It's kind of kept me busy for the last 35 years, is being involved in the whole transformation of radiology to the digital world that it's in now.
Amazing. Something tells me young Chris Wood and young Trevor Royce would have been great friends, and I suspect Tim Showalter as well. We're both radiation oncologists, and radiation biology and radiation physics plays a large part of our professional world.
Yeah, and doing grad school at Moffitt was an amazing experience. I was right there in the nuclear medicine department, and we were dealing with patients. We were writing software, and that software is being used on patients. And to see that impact was really kind of profound for me and just hooked me to this whole industry. And, I sort of never looked back after that point.
I want to quickly go back to two comments you made about the genesis of RevealDX. And if I caught them correctly, there were two things. One was a solvable big problem, and two, the reimbursement piece. Can you give the listeners a little bit of context on that reimbursement piece? Because I think that's so important to unlocking how this can actually reach patients and heart flow. Like, there's a great history there in this side of health technology that it may be underappreciated.
Yeah, I mean, AI has moved a lot faster than Medicare and the payers, right? And a lot of AI products have actually made it through FDA pretty easily, relatively. So there's hundreds of medical imaging AI products out there, but almost all of them need to be supported through the radiologist actually taking money out of their pocket, or the health system taking money out of their finances and paying for them because they feel like it's worth it, not because they get reimbursed by insurance, even if it has a positive impact on outcomes. There was a very few, 10 years ago, there were just basically mammography CAD was like the only thing reimbursed. But now we've got pathways for reimbursement. You mentioned HeartFlow. They started out with a Category 3 code, which was reimbursed. Then they finally converted to a Cat 1 code, which means it's in the Medicare physician fee schedule. We've got Clearly, another company that has gotten plaque characterization now, is going to be converted to a Cat 1 code at the first of the year. So we've got these kind of established pathways now. And Reveal, our software, you can bill it against a Cat 3 code currently. And it's part of our responsibility as the vendor, as well as others that are in this space, our competitors, to continue to add that clinical validation to drive up usage of the software, to do the health economics analysis, to convince the powers that be that this thing should continue to get paid. But we feel like we're in a very, very good spot because, as you both know, anything you can do to accelerate diagnosis of lung cancer is really going to have a big impact on patients as well as cost. So we feel like we've got a really clear path to getting this thing converted to Cat 1. It's not like we're there yet, but we feel very confident about that.
From my understanding, we've gone a step further, I think, with RevealDX, in that in addition to identifying lung nodules, your product does some work to actually characterize the lung nodule and define sort of behavior. Can you maybe, just because it does relate to the clinical utility, can you go into a little bit more detail there?
Well, we've got this incredibly sensitive test, which is chest CT, that finds today, it's got such good resolution, it's such good tech that you can find nodules that are 5 millimeters, even smaller, right? Very sensitive test. If you have early stage lung cancer, it's really, really likely you're going to be able to see it with chest CT. But those cancers are mixed in with a whole bunch of benign nodules. And the theory behind RevealDX is that if you feed enough multidimensional information and the right feature set into an AI system, it will be able to see things that radiologists cannot see, that characterize that nodule and allow you to pick out the ones that are essentially at higher risk. Think of it as like the nodule kind of expressing radiomic biomarkers is what we call them, right? So subtle features that maybe a Brad can't appreciate with their human visual system. Maybe they're more three-dimensionally oriented. Maybe they have more to do with their surrounding parenchyma. But the AI system is able to synthesize all that information, and we look at thousands of features and then immediately produce a score, which can then inform whether or not this particular nodule is one that needs to be followed closely. Because I talk to health systems all the time, and the bigger health systems out there, I mean, they can find 1,000 nodules a month, right? So tracking all of those patients and making sure that they follow up right on schedule is often very, very difficult. And you can't, from a health economic standpoint, follow all of those super closely. So you end up getting patients with small nodules, tell them to come back in a year. They may or may not come back. I think it's like under 50% will even come back at all. And that doesn't necessarily present itself as a big problem right away because most of those patients do have benign nodules, right? The vast majority of those small nodules are benign. But if you look at the National Lung Screening Trial data, about half of all cancers first present as small nodules. If you can pick out which ones to act on and to be aggressive about your diagnostic process with, you can accelerate diagnosis for a good portion of these. And of course, that translates to huge savings because the data right now that's been coming out from ILCAP and others show that the survival rate is fantastic if you can surgically intervene early. The ILCAP data says 20-year survival rate is over 80% for small cancers that are found on chest CT that are acted upon surgically. It's a curative process, right? So we want to put more patients into that category as quickly as we can and not let them to progress to that late stage where 70% of all cancers are currently diagnosed, right? Because once you're in that late stage, your 5-year survival rate is terrible. So we want to catch them as early as possible, but not bankrupt the entire health system while doing it. And of course, you guys know, you can't stick a needle in everything you find in a lung, right? And find out whether or not through pathology, whether it's cancer. Complications rate is really high for biopsying lung tissue. So we've got kind of this, I saw it as like this perfect storm. The reason I thought this was the company I wanted to be involved with is because this is a problem that needs to be solved without intervention, if possible. And there's just this opportunity to improve it so much compared to what's happening today. I thought we would be successful. And so far, we're pleased with the results we're getting.
Great. Yeah, that's really well presented. For context for the readers, lung cancer is the most deadly diagnosis in the US, contributes to the most cancer deaths. And it's preventable a lot of the times, to your point, and that's why things like lung cancer screening are supported by guidelines. My practice is at the VA, and they have a very robust lung cancer screening program, but one can see it being overwhelmed by all these images coming through and the need for radiologists and knowing what to do about all these lung nodules. And so to your point, Chris, I think using AI to identify these makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons, including solving such a huge problem that can help so many patients.
Yeah, the joke right now in radiology is that when you enter the emergency department right now, you might as well just walk through the CT scanner, right? Because like so many CTs are done on so many people that come into the ED currently. And CT scans are just getting so ubiquitous. We do 20 million a year in the United States, which means we're finding about, with the resolution that they're getting now, 8 million lung nodules. We're finding more than 20,000 nodules a day. That's just in the US. You can't say, okay, we're going to follow each one of these patients very, very closely for the next 2 years until we find out what happens to this nodule. If there's a way, and we feel like we've got a way, to use artificial intelligence to look at that data very, very closely and pick out those nodules that we really need to be concerned about, that will do nothing but help the health system. And of course, and patients. All of this stuff isn't completely figured out yet. We work with individual providers to figure out exactly how they want to deploy this technology. But we do have a tool that we know works. We've validated on over half a dozen studies all around the world. Every time we're able to outperform the diagnostic process standard of care today by adding this artificial intelligence in. And if in the aggregate, we can detect about 45% of all lung cancers faster than you would using standard follow-up techniques, according to the guidelines that you mentioned. So, you've got potentially half your cancers where you can accelerate diagnosis. That's going to really move the needle.
To that end, I guess, how has it been received by the healthcare providers or the radiology community, I guess, more specifically? Culturally, people always think of AI as sort of existential, like there are all these challenges of how it'll be used. Can you reflect on that a little bit?
Yeah, radiologists do not want to be slowed down. That's written in a tablet somewhere, right? And the reason for that is because they're completely overwhelmed and overworked. So it's tough to say to them, here's something that can potentially improve patient care, but it's going to slow you down a lot. So we had to do a lot of work to make sure that this was super fast, super easy. But the response has actually been quite good. I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One is the reimbursement, that this particular test happens to have. And the next is just chest CT in general. If you look at all the medical imaging exams that are performed, chest CT is the slowest one to read. I mean, looking at lung nodules is a small part of reading a chest CT. It'll take on the average, I think, between 9 and 12 minutes to read a chest CT. That's slow for a rad. And there's a lot you need to look at there, right? Covers a lot of the anatomy, the heart and lungs and everything else. You're kind of taking a look at everything where things go wrong with people. So a little bit of help with this particular problem, which also happens to have big implications for the health of the patient, but also medical legal issues are related to this, because a small nodule with a very low likelihood of malignancy, that patient could come back, a year later and have stage 4 advanced stage lung cancer. And then you've got an issue, right? This is a tool that allows you to say, look, we're dealing with these nodules using the best technology we have. And it just makes reading that chest CT a little bit easier. We don't claim we speed them up, but we also don't slow them down. And we provide a more valuable report that benefits the radiologist because they want to add as much value as possible, and also provides this additional boost of reimbursement. We're trying to get professional fees as well. Right now, we have a technical fee. When we get that professional fee, we'll actually be able to reward the radiologist for all the time they spend looking at the score that we provide and interpreting it, inserting it into the report. Right now, they cover that cost, but at least the technical fee is there to benefit whoever owns the CT scanner and to try to fund these programs to manage nodules a little more effectively. Because that's almost universally what we hear from customers is they're not looking at this to save their hospital from, its economic woes. We're not going to do that. We're not, it's not enough money to do that, but there is enough money from this code to do things like hire nurse navigators, to buy software they need to manage nodules, to improve their lung cancer and lung nodule management programs, which all of them want to do. They're all understaffed in that regard, and they all know the benefits to patients of a good nodule management program.
Chris, you started off early in the conversation and referencing just how many scans are done, and seems like every hospital needs to have a lung cancer screening program or a small nodule clinic as well. What's been the reception of the hospital administrators and the health system leaders overall? Have you found that, of course, they're the stakeholder that owns the scanners, usually that you reference? What's the reception been to your technology overall?
Well, certainly, I think there's kind of 2 or 3 different positives that I can point out. One is some of them are interested in it from a marketing standpoint. I mean, AI is sexy right now. If they're trying to build lung cancer screening in their community, they can say that they've got this AI-enabled technology at their hospital, and that can be attractive. The other is obviously the reimbursement. We've talked to health system administrators who really just didn't flat out have the money to invest in more of the nodule management infrastructure that they wanted to, and they look at this as a way to fund that. Because we're not taking the entire reimbursement as a company. We're revenue sharing that with the health system. So it can help cover some of the expenses of things they really wanted to do. And then the third is that there's a lot of competition for doctors right now, especially some of these docs, thoracic surgeons, pulmonologists, radiologists. They all have a lot to do with this problem. They're all interested in this technology. And if you as a health system administrator can keep your thoracic surgeon happy, you're going to try to do that. If you're a thoracic surgeon, on the other hand, who just started using your robotic bronchoscopy system, the goal of that system is to try to be able to biopsy small nodules. 8 out of 10 of these biopsies turns out to be benign, right? You're not going to feel good about using your system, your robot that way. But if you can find something that'll identify higher risk nodules in your program, then you're in there biopsying malignant small nodules a lot. You're having this positive impact on the patient with this new tech. And so that tech, that robotic bronchoscopy technology, is actually accelerating interest in our product.
That's great. You've really hit on a spot that serves a lot of needs, of course, for ultimately it benefits the patients because you're providing a sort of risk adapted approach for them, providers, health systems. It seems to be virtuous for payers too. What's been the most surprising challenge along the way for developing this? It sounds like what you've produced really drives a solution, but I'm always curious in building this. What was the bottleneck maybe that you did not anticipate or that surprised you along the way?
I think one of the things that it always surprises me is that there's some education that needs to be done when using a product like ours. I think there's a tendency for us just as humans to trust that AI is just going to give us the answer, right? You go to Claude or you go to some tool out there, right? And it's really upsetting when you don't get the right answer, right? Um, because we're kind of thinking that this is kind of a magic technology. So, one of the things we need to educate people about when they're using this is that, look, we're showing through our score that that nodule is expressing certain biomarkers and it's a higher risk. This is not a virtual biopsy. And it would be great if it was, right? It would be great if we could just like run the tech on a nodule and say, yep, that one's malignant, 100%. This one's benign, 100%. It's not there yet. We need to educate people that that's not the way AI works. But if you integrate this into the program, and that's why I've been talking so much about nodule management and sort of how these different departments are related, you can really move the needle. You can really improve early detection within your health system. But it's not a magic bullet. And I guess I've been working in AI so long that I didn't expect some people would feel that way. But we have had that happen where people have thought, and then we have to correct them. And there's an education process of like, well, all right, well, if it's not 100%, then how do we actually use this thing? So, really, as a company, part of what we need to do is provide support for people who adopt this technology to help them understand how they can use it properly in their specific health system. Because there's variations in health systems, what their goals are, what their particular problems are. You really need to partner with a company when you're deploying technology like this. It's not just, pick it off the shelf and it gives you this 100% answer. It is a partnership. But I think we've figured out how to navigate that with a number of customers. As we get these systems rolled out in the United States, we'll just get better and better at that. But right now, it takes a little longer to deploy these than we'd like because we have to each time figure out how that particular health system is going to benefit from our tech the most. But as we get more and more customers, that'll get easier and easier, as it did in Europe. We've seen that happening.
Following up on that from the provider perspective, I mean, I guess first, just a general comment on the topic that came up earlier. This tool can make the healthcare system more efficient and help these providers be more efficient. It's a very useful tool in their toolbox. And for our listeners, it depends on your perspective, but there are all sorts of concerns about physician shortages. And this is a great example that can help mitigate some of the specialty shortages. But beyond that, can you tell us a little bit more on the product side, like how this is integrated in clinic, like what it looks like from the physician perspective? How are the results delivered as much as you're willing and can share? Like, how do you actually deliver these insights?
Yeah, so we decided that the place to deploy our technology was at the point at which the nodule is found. And that means inserting it into the radiologist workflow. We decided to not deploy this technology on nodules after they're referred to nodule clinic or tumor board, because bottom line is our tech works really well on small nodules, and we wanted to find early cancers. So the way our software is deployed is that it's deployed at the point at which the radiologist finds the nodule. And that can mean a single click by the radiologist, which then sends those coordinates to us. We compute the score and we send the score back. So that's right inside their PAC system. So that is an extra click. If the radiology group uses something called a nodule detector, and there are a number of commercial vendors out there doing that, then the coordinates for the nodule can be sent to us a priori before the radiologist even sees the scan. And then the score, our score, which we call malignancy similarity index, is presented right next to the nodule when the rad pulls it up, right? So it's super easy workflow for them if they have a nodule detector. If they don't, they have to find the nodule, and then they have to click on it to get our score. So like I said, we're trying to minimize it. The easiest way to go to market really is by partnering with some nodule detectors and PAC systems so that we can kind of just go right into their specific IT environment, integrate with them, minimize the impact for the hospital IT department, and just say we're kind of bolted onto the PACs or some of the other AI tools they might have.
Great. Curious for you, What's next? What's 2026 and 2027 looking like for RevealDX?
I mentioned that we are in the market and currently installed clinically in Europe at a number of sites. We are only installed in the United States under IRB because we are in the process of getting through the FDA. I risk jinxing myself, if I say we plan to get through by the end of the year, but that's our plan. So we'll see. Right now, we're pretty confident we're going to be able to get through the FDA because we did submit in mid 2025. So we're hoping to get that final decision. And then we have customers just lined up, ready to go. So in 2026, we'll be scaling the company in the United States, continuing to build our market in the EU, doing more partnerships. The PACS industry is pretty fragmented. So you can get 20% of the market, maybe, by going with the leading PACS vendor. You're not going to get 80%. So, and then after that, it kind of goes down, right? So the last company I started, the one I sold previously, we had integrated with over 30 PACS. So we'll be doing more integrations as we bring on more customers because of that fragmented market in PACS. And then, of course, we've got other ideas looking up and down the diagnostic process in lung cancer. And there are a lot of problems to be solved there, and I think AI can help with some of those. We don't currently have plans to break out into other cancers right now, but we'll see. If it looks like our technology can really help another cancer, we might decide to go after what we would call like another vertical. But right now, we're a lung cancer company.
Amazing. Well, we're certainly excited to see how the next 5 years unfold for you all, and we'll be following along closely.
Well, thanks a lot.
I guess as we come to our close here, final question for you is, as you reflect on your career and journey, do you have any advice for entrepreneurs or clinicians as they consider their own adventures in health technology and maybe starting their own AI companies?
I think it's a good time, actually, to come into this space. It's sometimes a little difficult to be the first mover. We saw a lot of AI companies kind of come into being in medical imaging right at the time when people were saying, like, radiologists are going to go away. This is going to be, completely disrupted. A lot of those companies are really struggling, and we're seeing a lot of those get purchased now. A lot of them even sort of acqui-hired, right? I look at this, what's happening now is kind of the second wave where we've got real business models behind these companies. We've got reimbursement, which is going to create revenue opportunities that are going to fund the entire medical imaging AI industry. We're not just kind of rushing out with products and hoping that we can figure it out, right? So I would say if you're going to build a healthcare AI company or any kind of healthcare tech company, the sort of Silicon Valley approach of move fast and break things, and that's not really the one that generally works best. It's best to be thoughtful, maybe a little patient, and also think about the economics, the entire ecosystem, all the physicians who are affected by this type of change to their work. And if you are thoughtful about it, there's benefits of being an entrepreneur in healthcare. And one is that obviously there's motivation, like just in there helping people and helping patients. But also, if you can establish those relationships, like I was talking about, your partnership type relationships with the providers, and you can work with them to solve their problems, they become incredibly loyal customers. And that's one of the things that's nice being an entrepreneur in health systems that sells to health systems, is that if you get to the point where you understand them and you can get them to trust you, then you can be a successful entrepreneur. That's just sort of my style. So try to find an industry where your style matches. If you're looking to build a rocket ship that's going to, have a $12 billion valuation 6 months after you start it, go into something else, right? Don't go into healthcare, right? But if you're thoughtful, maybe tackle things a little more scientifically, you have a little bit of patience, and you like partnering with customers, then maybe this is a good field for you as an entrepreneur. I feel like it has been for me.
That's fantastic. Chris, we should close there. That's a great summary. And it does inspire the future generation of entrepreneurs by, I think, highlighting the virtuous cycle of healthcare, which is you get strong science and you get to make an impact, which is so great. So thanks so much for joining us. It's been amazing to hear about your journey with RevealDX.
Oh, it was fun. Thanks for having me on.
That's it for this episode of Health Tech Remedy. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share the show. Subscribers are so important to supporting our mission. See you next time.